People should get the full story on our Bitcoin because it is probably one of the strangest of all Reddit subs, not only because of its recent censorship regarding the hard fork, Reddit/Bitcoin. The main sub for the Bitcoin community is held and run by a person who goes by the name of Thamus. But this Thamus guy not only controls the biggest Bitcoin subreddit, but also bitcoin.org and bitcointalk.com. Now just keep in mind that these are for the top 3 communication channels for the Bitcoin community, all controlled by just one person. Either way, for most of Bitcoin's history, this did not create a problem, at least not an obvious one, according to some veterans on the subreddit, until mid-2015. Problems surfaced around the time a new player appeared on the scene, a for-profit company called Blockstream. Blockstream was made up of many main Bitcoin developers. To be clear at this point, Blockstream was founded before mid-2015, but did not become publicly active till then. A lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts, including myself, tried to point out that there were some very serious potential conflicts of interest that could arise when one single company controls most of the main developers for the biggest decentralized and distributed cryptocurrency. There were a lot of unknowns, but people seemed to give them the benefit of the doubt because they were apparently about to release some new software called sidechains that could offer some benefits to the network. Not long after Blockstream came on the scene, the issue of Bitcoin's scalability once again came to the forefront of the community. This issue came within the community a number of times since Bitcoin's inception, to be fair. Bitcoin, as dictated in the code, cannot handle any more than 3 transactions per second at the moment. To put that into perspective, PayPal handles around 15 transactions per second on average, and Visa handles something like 2,000 transactions per second, but I don't know the exact numbers, but the estimates are pretty accurate and demonstrate the main problem. The discussion in the community has been around how to best allow Bitcoin to scale to allow a number of transactions in any given time. Stay with me on this one. It's a complex issue, but for many who have followed Bitcoin for many years, the possible solutions seem relatively obvious. Essentially, currently the limit is put in place in just a few lines of code. This was not originally present when Bitcoin was first released. It was in fact put in place afterwards as a measure to stop a bloating attack on the network. Because all Bitcoin transactions have been to be stored forever on the Bitcoin network, someone could theoretically simply transmit a large number of transactions, which would have had to been stored by the network forever. When Bitcoin was released, transactions were actually for free, as the only people running the network were enthusiasts, like this guy, explaining to you this shit right now. As a matter of fact, a single Bitcoin did not even have any specific value, so it would seem impossible to set a fee value at those times. This meant that a malicious person could make the size of the Bitcoin ledger grow very rapidly without much cost, which would stop people from wanting to join the network due to the resources requirements needed to stop it, which at the time would have been for very little gain. Towards the end of the summer last year, this Bitcoin scaling debate surfaced again, as it was becoming clear that the transaction limit for Bitcoin was semi-regularly being reached, and that it would not be long until it would be regularly hit and the network would be congested. This was a very serious issue for the currency. Bitcoin had made progress over the years to the point of retailers starting to offer it as a payment option. Bitcoin companies like Microsoft, PayPal, Steam, and many more had begun to adopt it. If the transaction limit would be constantly maxed out, the network would become unreliable and slow for users. Users and businesses would not be able to make a reliable estimate when their transaction would be confirmed by the network. There was a significant support from the users and businesses behind a simple solution put forward by the developer Gavin Andresen. Gavin was the lead developer after Satoshi Nakamoto left Bitcoin and left it in his hands. Gavin initially proposed a very simple solution for increasing the limit, which was to change a few lines of code to increase maximum number of transactions that are allowed. For most of Bitcoin's history, the transaction limit had been set far, far higher than the number of transactions that could potentially happen on a network. The concept of increasing the limit of one time was based on the fact that history had proven that there was no issue, and there was no issue that had been caused by this in the past. A certain group of Bitcoin developers decided that increasing the limit by this amount was too much and that it was dangerous. They said that the increased use of resources that the network could create centralization pressures, which could destroy the network. The theory was that a miner of the network with more resources could publish many more transactions that a competing small miner could handle, and therefore the network would tend towards few large miners rather than small mini miners. The group of developers who supported this theory were all developers who worked for the company Blockstream. The argument from people in support of increasing the transaction capacity by this amount was that there are always inherent centralization pressure with Bitcoin mining. For example, miners who can access the cheapest electricity will be able to succeed, and that bigger miners will be able to find cheaper electricity easier. Miners who have access to most of the efficient computer chips will tend to succeed, and that larger miners are more likely to be able to afford the development of them. The argument from Gavin and others who supported the increasing transaction capacity by this method are essentially the economies of scale in mining, and that these economies have far bigger centralization pressures than increased resource cost for a larger number of transactions, up to the new limit proposed. For example, at the time, the total size of the blockchain was around 50 gigabytes. Even for the cost of 50 gigabytes SSD is only $150 and would last a number of years. This in comparison to the hundreds of thousands in revenue per day a miner would be making. Various developers put forth various other proposals, including Gavin Anderson, who put forth a more conservative increase that would then continue to increase over time in line with technology improvements. Some of the employees of Blockstream also put forth some proposals, but all were so conservative it would take Bitcoin many decades before it could reach a scale of Visa. Even though there was a significant support from the community behind Gavin's simple proposal of increasing the limit, it was becoming clear that certain members of the Bitcoin community who are part of the Blockstream were starting to become increasingly vitriolic, divisive. Gavin then teamed up with one of the main Bitcoin developers, Mike Hearn, and released a coded working version of the Bitcoin software that would only activate if it was supported by a significant majority of the network. What happened next was where things really started to get weird. After this free and open source software was released, Themis, the person who controls all the main communication channels for the Bitcoin community, implemented a new moderation policy that disallowed any discussion of the new software. Specifically, if people were to discuss this software, their comments would be deleted and ultimately they would be banned temporarily or permanently. This caused chaos within the community as there was a very clear support for this software at the time, and it seemed our best hope for finally solving the problem and moving on. Instead, a censorship campaign was started. At first, they were all doing but banning and removing discussions, but after a while it turned into actively manipulating the discussion. For example, if a thread was created where there was positive sentiment for increasing the transaction capacity of being negative about the moderation policies or negative about the actions of certain Bitcoin developers, the mods of our Bitcoin would selectively change the sorting order of threads to controversial so that the most support opinions would be sorted to the bottom of the thread and the most vitriolic would be sorted to the top of the thread. This was initially very transparent, as it was possible to see that most downvoted comments were at the top and some of the most upvoted were at the bottom. So then they implemented hiding the voting scores next to the usernames. This made it impossible to work out the sentiment of the community, and when combined with the selectivity setting the sorting order to controversial, it was possible to control what information users were seeing. Also, due to the very, very large number of removed comments and users, it was becoming obvious the scale of censorship going on.